Hello, I'm Rob Shimshock, reporter for the Daily Caller News Foundation, and today I'd like to welcome author and commentator Ben Shapiro to the Shimshock Show. Ben, how are you?
Doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing very well. So, Ben invaded the UC Berkeley safe space last night, giving a speech entitled "Say No to Campus Thuggery." I believe there were 9 arrests, 4 of which were for banned weapons, but overall it was generally peaceful, and he was able to give a full speech and Q&A. So, Ben, you've spoken at several colleges before. How unique was your treatment by Berkeley and its administrators, students, and citizens?
I mean, this one was pretty. It was pretty interesting. I mean, I speak at probably 20 to 25 college campuses a year, so this would be my 40th or so college campus that I've spoken at in the last year and a half. This one was different mainly because of the level of security that was necessary in order to keep Antifa from getting violent. I mean, there were businesses in the neighborhood that were shutting their doors early. There were ATMs that were being boarded up to prevent Antifa violence from ruining them. The police showed up en masse. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of police officers in full-out riot gear ready to go. The police said, by the way, that they were very pleased that the administration had finally untied their hands because they've been watching for a year while Antifa's been running riot in the city. And finally, they were told by the administrators that if you need to arrest people, arrest people. If they show up in masks, arrest them. If they show up with banned weapons, arrest them. And shock of shocks, it turns out that everything was peaceful, and we were able to go through with a normal, I think, decent conservative discussion of the issues. And nobody got killed, nobody got hurt, and yeah, all of that is a good thing. So yeah, this is what happens. You need law and order in order to protect the First Amendment. But Berkeley, for a year, had ignored that. Now they seem to be returning to their senses.
Sure. Now, what you often hear in the articles about Berkeley in particular is this ambiguous stand-down order that the police are given. And so do you know how the administration intends this to function? And then what do you think of the actual outcome?
Yes, I mean, I've been there when stand-down orders have been given. So in February 2016, I spoke at Cal State Los Angeles, and there was basically a stand-down order given to the police officers to allow students to lock doors, push around other students, pull the fire alarm. So what happens in these cases is that the officers are basically told, you can't do anything. Let students do what they're going to do. When I spoke at University of Wisconsin, we were told that the police had been told that if protesters had to be removed, then they should shut down the entire event. So protesters were able to hold up the event for 20, 25 minutes and just make a fuss. Yeah, these ambiguous stand-down orders are a real problem. In Berkeley, that's not an option, because if they continue to tell the police that they need to stand down in the face of people who are actually getting violent, they're not fulfilling their basic civic duty.
Right. Now, is there something particularly toxic to the climate of Berkeley where we've seen in the headlines, it seems like pretty much every month this year? We had Milo's speech in February. We had Ann Coulter's planned speech in April. Is there something really cancerous in the air with regard to free speech that keeps on putting it in the headlines?
I mean, I do think there's something cancerous happening with regard to free speech on campuses. I think that's the general microaggression mentality. This idea that if I speak, it's like an act of physical aggression to you. It's violence. I mean, there were people legitimately outside the speech last night chanting, "Speech is violence, speech is violence." Well, when you think speech is violence, then presumably if I say something that offends you, I've done some act of violence toward you, and you get to react in kind. It's a justification for groups like Antifa. I think as far as Berkeley goes, number one, Antifa is much more active there than it is in a lot of other cities. Number two, the mayor of Berkeley has been lax in his willingness to quash Antifa. And number three, the campus has been lax up to this point. So I'm glad that there was a show of force by the university last night. I think that actually is the biggest story, is that the university was forced by Young America's Foundation and college Republicans, and by my speech last night, they were forced into a position where if they wanted to defend free speech, they would actually have to physically defend free speech.
Sure. Now, you mentioned Antifa, and this reminds me of a poll that came out this week in which 77, 65, and 52% of Americans sampled oppose neo-Nazism, white nationalism, and the alt-right, respectively. But only 39% of the country oppose Antifa. Why do you think this is, and which one of these movements do you think poses the greatest threat to America?
Well, I mean, I think that they all pose a threat to America in different ways and in combination with one another. In other words, I think that if Antifa didn't exist, the alt-right would have nothing to push up against. I think if the alt-right didn't exist, Antifa wouldn't be able to call people like me alt-right, which is just absurd. All of these ideologies are terrible. I think in terms of historical, I think there's two questions: the ideology of the groups and then the violent level of the groups. So Antifa is actually the most violent of the groups that we've talked about, except, I mean, there are white supremacists who are deeply violent, but the so-called alt-right. is slightly different and broader than white supremacists. But Antifa, their entire goal is by any means necessary. This entire idea is that they're violent. I think one of the reasons that they've been allowed to get away with it is, number one, they call themselves anti-fascist, and because they're of the left, the media have granted them that title. And number two, the media generally just have not covered Antifa. I mean, people don't know that Antifa basically had a riot in Sacramento in August 2016. They don't know that Antifa had threatened violence to the extent they shut down like a normal Republican parade in Portland months ago. They don't know any of this stuff, right? People only see what they see in the news. And so after Charlottesville, obviously, the alt-right is on the front burner. After the last election cycle, the alt-right is on everybody's front burner. But Antifa, people just don't even know what it is.
Right. Now, I think you mentioned, with regard to Antifa, this equation, perhaps a false equation, of violent words with actual violence. Where do you think this came from, and what do you think can be done to rectify it?
Well, I think that the words as violence routine has been growing on college campuses for a long time, and Antifa is the logical extension of that. This is the microaggression culture that suggests that if I say something that offends you, then I haven't just offended you, I've microaggressed you, or I've committed an act of aggression against you, and you can therefore lash out against me. That's pretty dark stuff. Jonathan Haidt, the social psychologist from NYU, has said that this makes students weak, it makes them fall into a victim mentality, and it makes them more likely to be violent, which I think is all correct. It's seriously disturbing. The only way to fight back against it is to recognize that you're not a victim, and if I say something that you find offensive, maybe you ought to analyze whether you're offended rightly, or maybe you took it the wrong way, or maybe I made a mistake in talking, but maybe I'm not out to offend you because that's not what I do. Maybe we ought to give each other the benefit of the doubt a little bit more, instead of seeking to revel in our own victimhood.
Right, it could be that respect for the common shared humanity of people, instead of trying to demonize those with different opinions, would be the best approach. So what would be your advice to students who want to shift the political trajectory on their college campus? How would you suggest they go about their activism, particularly when they might need to simultaneously appease left-leaning professors?
Well, so I think that the first thing to know is that there are groups out there to help you, College Republicans, Young America's Foundation. I mean, there are lots of great groups to help you. I'm particularly a fan of YAF, of course, because they sponsor a lot of my speeches. But the fact is that one of the things I think it's imperative for conservatives on campus to understand is there is a difference between drinking leftist tears and espousing a good ideology. You can do both, but you shouldn't just focus on, oh, I triggered a lefty and therefore I did something worthwhile. Well, it's very easy to trigger people on the left. That doesn't necessarily mean that you said or did anything worthwhile. You should trigger people with truth, and your focus should be the truth, not the triggering. If you do that, then I think that you're going to have a lot more success than if you focus on, oh, look, I made another snowflake melt. I mean, it's the easiest thing in the world to go on campus and tick off these oversensitive college students. If I wanted to make a living out of purely doing that, that would be a very, very easy living. But I think that we should all be more interested in pushing ideas and philosophies that we think matter.
Sure. Now, that kind of brings me to, with regard to provoking the left, what seems to be often the best approach for the left in terms of the right are these political comedy shows, the infotainment that is given by the likes of Stephen Colbert and John Oliver. Now, do you think that conservatives need to more branch out into that form of informing people, like injecting a bit of humor, or do you think the current approach is best?
No, I mean, I obviously think conservatives need to engage in humor. I think that one of the things we on the right tend to make a mistake of is thinking that you have to be provocateur to be humorous. I mean, we see this on the left too, right? Kathy Griffin is not funny when she's holding up a severed head of Donald Trump. And there's a difference between humor, being funny, being wry, being ironic, using absurdity to highlight absurdity. There's a difference between doing that and just saying the most offensive thing that comes to mind and then getting a shock laugh. Because you can get that. I mean, if you drop the F word, people will automatically laugh because it's shocking, right? And if you say something vile, people will automatically laugh because it's shocking. But the question is, can you be clever enough to actually push a philosophy while also being funny? And I think that you can. I don't see any reason why not. I mean, I hope that my speeches are entertaining. They seem to amuse people on YouTube and Facebook. So they're funny enough to entertain legitimately millions of people.
Sure. Now,
I'm not
I know
a comedian.
you have a lot of experience.
I'm not a comedian. I think there are comedians. Like, I think Steven Crowder does a good job of this. I think there are comedians who wish to push a particular philosophy with humor, and some do it better than others. But I think we need to keep away from the shock jocking of conservatism and turning it into whatever is the dumbest version of the bumper sticker is what I'm going to say today to demonstrate to everybody that I can piss off leftists.
Right now, in regard to the general communication of messages, one reason I really wanted to have you on the show, Ben, is because I think you are uniquely qualified to comment on the culture wars as they affect not just academia, but also other institutions like Hollywood and the media. So I wanted to ask you, which institution do you believe is the most steeped in ideology today, both internally, but then also in terms of the products they produce?
I mean, all three of them, but I think that in order it would be the university, Hollywood, and then the university, Hollywood, and the media. Again, all of them are very, very steeped in leftism. The university is the worst because you actually have professors actively promulgating a nasty politics that suggests that anyone who disagrees with them is a Nazi. Hollywood is bad because you have a bunch of ignoramuses who don't know anything about politics and so reflect the dumb bumper sticker version of what they see at the universities. And then the media is bad because they don't even recognize their own bias while they're doing all of these things. But as far as what is the most overtly damaging, I would say universities are the most obvious. I think the most subtle and most powerful is Hollywood. And I think the media is actually relatively ineffective at their indoctrination techniques because, especially when you're talking about the news media, we're all sort of attuned to the bias in the news media in a way that we aren't with Hollywood. When we watch a Hollywood film, I mean, I wrote a whole book called Primetime Propaganda about how people in Hollywood infuse messaging into their programming. When you watch a TV show, you turn off the political side of your brain and you just imbibe the programming. The same thing does not happen when you watch CNN. When you watch CNN, you're able to kind of sift the wheat from the chaff. You're able to see where the bias lies. When you watch a Hollywood movie, because it's done in narrative form or it's done through comedy, it's more likely that it's going to sneak past your sort of radar. And on campus, you're just talking about a very militant form of leftism that's being pushed at the university level.
Okay, now, yes, back to the university, I guess, for a second. We obviously have a very vulnerable population here intellectually. You have 18 to 22-year-olds who have very malleable minds. This is exactly at the point in their lives at which they need to be getting the, different opinions. And so do you see hope for the future? I mean, we always hear about the triggered millennials, but turning more to Generation Z, do you believe that, as they like to say, that they're going to become more woke about issues?
I mean, I do think that there is a lot of hope for young people on college campuses. Thousands of them show up to speeches like the one that I gave at Berkeley. People are hungry for a different opinion and for challenging their own views. I've always said that the people who are most disadvantaged by going to leftist universities are not conservatives, they're people on the left. Because as a conservative, I went to UCLA and then Harvard Law. It was a great opportunity for me to test the value of my own views and the strength of my own views in the face of opposition. If you're on the left, you never face that opposition, so you've never had your views questioned. You come out basically as fresh as the day you came in, and I think that's a problem.
All right, well, Ben, thanks so much for your time today. One thing I did want to mention is we hear a lot about the water crisis in California these days, but I think we often disregard one very important form of liquid, and that is liberal tears. In fact, I heard you've created a drinking glass that will enable our viewers to drink liberal tears, either hot or cold. Where can our viewers get one of these, and which do you prefer, hot or cold?
This is exactly right. Well, I always prefer liberal tears cold because revenge is best served thus. But here is that beautiful tumbler, the Leftist Tears Hot or Cold mug, and all you have to do is go over to Daily Wire and become an annual subscriber. For $99 a year, you get my show, you get Andrew Klavan's show and Michael Knowles' show, you can be part of our mailbag, and you get this wonderful mug, the greatest of all beverage vessels.
All right, great. Well, thanks again, Ben, and please keep up the good fight.
Hey, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.